how you can help your learners in the classroom by using some formative assessment strategies. So if I go on to my next slide, during the next hour, we will be exploring why, or the purpose of formative assessment, and then this toolkit that I've just mentioned. And we will also look at approaches and how we can apply them in our classroom. And then you'll have this great opportunity to ask questions at the end. Now, formative assessment is something that we do every day in the classroom. And here I like to think of assessment as like a journey that we take our learners on. And along that journey, that we're taking them in their learning of a particular subject or generally, we have various checks along the way. And this is what I call checkpoints, or opportunities for assessing and checking their understanding. So we would start off here along that journey with looking at the prerequisites or their prior knowledge by checking what they actually already know about something. Then we would engage along this journey with our approach to teaching, which is dialogic, which is like questions and answers, but then always building on their answers. At the same time, we want to get our learners to talk. For example, like you could say, just turn and talk. I'm going to be going into these kind of strategies in a lot more detail in a moment, but I thought I'd just take you on this roadmap. At some point along their journey, they are practicing independently, and along with the group talk, our role would be going round and listening to them, and then it would be a good opportunity to set higher, to seat our learners who may be higher attainers along with lower attainers. It would then be good to see what knowledge is there when they're talking. Then we will give them opportunities to reflect on their learning. And that is like, perhaps you could be doing this in a recording or practice stage. You could be using their workbooks or looking at some kind of mini assessments in class. And we're gathering inputs as you go along this journey and that will inform how you scaffold and extend the next stage. Finally, you will have then prepared your learners along this journey for some formal assessment or end of year exams, end of term exams. So this is what I like to think is about the roadmap for assessment. Now, I'm often asked, and I'm sure you're saying as well, like, what is summative assessment and what is formative assessment? Because we use both those terms, and I'll just establish with a few bullet points here the end result for what I would say in terms of the learner's learning or your children's learning, and that is what we mean by summative assessment. So summative assessment could be used every 2 to 3 weeks, or at the end of a unit that you're teaching from a course book, or the end of a module. I mean, it just depends on your learning goals. It's usually a standardized test format, and that could come from your course book, or it could be from a national exam or from an international exam. But it would give us a record of our student attainment, and then it's used to track progress against schools and international or external targets. It will also give us a piece of paper, like a dialogue, which will give enable us to have a dialogue with subject leaders or senior management. And also with that information, we can report to parents and external establishments. This is different from formative assessment. Now, if you want to, you could just use the chat box really quickly, okay? And we could have a look to see what your understanding is of formative assessment. So if you could just go into the chat really quickly, and I'll have a look.
Yes, so if you guys just put in the chat box what your ideas formative assessment is, it's just at the bottom of your screen, the chat box.
Ongoing assessment, thank you. Tools to decide the next step, lovely. It's aimed at, okay, assessment for learning, lovely. Continues, okay, check the understanding, assessing the process. Yes, we're there, okay. Okay, certain points, maybe like exit point tickets, yes, Omar. Fantastic. Assessing the process, check it. Yes, it's like assessing the process. It's not assessing the product. Valeria, thank you for saying that. Yeah, and it's checking understanding at different points along the way. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to summarize that. I'll just, oh, apologies. I expanded the chat rather than minimize. So also, this is the distinction for me, okay, and okay, assessment for learning, not just for learning, ongoing informal checks and supports both students and teachers. Yeah, okay, and this is, okay, what we see in the textbooks, but let's do a reality check before we move on. And let's think about, we've got all of this in our heads and this is what we should be doing. And then you also, you think, we imagine our students, they're always prepared, they've got the eyes sparkling and they've got the hands eagerly raised and homework neatly done and excited about every new topic. But we're not living in a pedagogy textbook, are we? We're living in real life and life happens. Sometimes a student isn't ready because they were taking care last night of a younger sibling. Or, you know, they couldn't do their homework, or they couldn't do the flipped learning because there was no electricity. And also, like, some students may be sitting there in the classroom and they're emotionally drained. And it's in those moments, okay, it's in those magic moments that assessment becomes more than a grade, really. It becomes a form of support. And then, okay, to cut a long story short, assessment in a classroom, any classroom, my classroom, your classroom, it's not a fixed score, which we've established, okay, but it's an ongoing dialogue between you and your student or your students. So moving on, and before I go into some more practical solutions, I'm just going to bring up this slide, which you may have seen before. It's work that a academic or pedagogue called Dylan Williams just established, and he calls it the assessment for learning cycle. So Dylan has been very influential in this field of formative assessment in the classroom, and you can look up his work. I will give you the reading list at the end, but we're going to pick up here a few aspects of the principles here of good practice today. So if you look at the slide, we want to, first of all, really establish where the learner is going so that a learner is understanding what he's meant to do or she's meant to do. And then we want to know where the learner is right now, and then how to move that learner forward or student forward with giving them that support to moving on to the next steps. So the core principles really of formative assessment, and I think of this as like oiling the cogs of that car that we're taking them along that journey of learning in the classroom. So let's look at continuous, and then thinking that assessment, okay, the principle of continuous means that assessment happens throughout learning, not just at the end. I could give you an example now, and that's like the exit ticket that somebody suggested, or the quick quizzes. Now, informal and low stakes, this principle means that assessment it's relaxed, and it doesn't carry heavy grading weight. And this is the thing that is happening all the time. I will give you some examples later. Okay, next is that the principle of it being student-centered. The students are actively involved in assessing and improving their own learning. They're in charge of their learning. And this is where we kind of blur formative assessment alongside metacognition, because we're getting them to be aware of their own learning and to really think about how they can move their own learning forward. Now, I did say that formative assessment isn't about giving grades, but we can use evidence that we collect in the classroom, so to guide instruction. And so an example could be using the results, say, from a quick quiz. It could also be using a learning platform, an adaptive learning platform, and I will show you something later that has been produced by Collins, and it's used in some of the course books. And then also with data, perhaps say that we've collected, say, from looking at homeworks, we would be changing our teaching for the next lesson. And then the last bullet point, actionable feedback. If we think about the principle there, and that is helping with the feedback, it will help the students to know what to do to improve. I will go into this kind of strategy later about how we can really give good feedback to help our learners. So, why does it matter? You may be thinking that, hold on, okay, I have got to train students for exams. I don't have time to do all these little things like we've mentioned already about exit tickets or online quizzes. Think about, though, think that it does matter, because it will support your student growth. It gives us information about our own teaching. It does increase engagement if we can employ these strategies quickly and slickly. And it will reduce learning gaps. And that is like within the classroom, with one student knowing perhaps more than the other, and also within the curriculum. So it does help with differentiation. Oops. I want us to think about teaching that sticks. Science tells us that we only, oops, let me move back. Okay, teaching that sticks. Science tells us that we only remember the things, that we think about. So if we're given lots of facts by the teacher in the classroom, and the students aren't actively like employed in using those facts, then it's not, that knowledge is not going to stick with them. Formative assessment is our tool, though, for finding out what the levels of understanding are, who is getting it and who is not. I also like to think about us as teachers and our role in taking our learners along that journey, and us thinking that we could be the chief mechanics oiling the engine of that student's car. We could also be, I'd say, like chameleons, and that is, we need to adapt to our classroom of learners. So to be effective, responsive teachers, we need to give those strategies to help our learners along the way. Now, this could be, as I mentioned at the beginning, like exploring children's prior knowledge. And it's then monitoring how well they're understanding the content and then assessing at the end. Now, before I go into giving you some strategies, I'd like to perhaps share some challenges with you, because you might be thinking, okay, I've got limited time. I can't do this. You might be thinking, my class is too big. I can't go round and observe every pair that's talking. Okay, how am I going to do that? So I would suggest here very quickly with the solution, if you're asked that question, you could use a mix of whole class feedback, peer feedback, or you could use digital tools that automate feedback, and I will show you something in a moment. Or you could just use simple rubrics or success criteria. Another challenge could be student reluctance. They don't want to be involved with giving or be involved in peer work. So we have got to change that mindset around by giving them some solutions. And this could be to do with the toolkit, that we're going to offer in a moment. So with that toolkit, we're going to give short, simple strategies, and it's going to help you embed formative assessment in your daily routine of teaching. And in that classroom that we've got, or you've got, you're going to foster a safe environment for mistakes. One tip I would give you here is don't try everything at once that I'm going to suggest now. Just think of one thing that you can take away, perhaps from today's webinar, and then come back perhaps to the toolkit again, and then think about doing that in the following week. So let's look at the toolkit now. And I'm going to give you the first tool here. And this is like in our question and discussion, or our dialogic teaching approach along that journey, okay, that we're taking our learners on. Now, I'm going to give you 3 suggestions here. Think, Pair, Share, or TPS, can be used at any stage along the journey, whether you want to tap into prior knowledge, promote group talk, or independent practice. So I would often say, think about something, pair, and then they're talking together and then sharing to the whole group. And you can manage that in so many different ways. Now, with thinking about something, I'm suggesting that you plan your great questions in advance, including what we call, or what I call, a hinge question. And that is the golden question that you can have to check their understanding. You could also do something, and there's right at the end of a lesson, is ask an interesting question. That is, it's not really testing their knowledge, but it's getting them to think about something so that they can come back in the next lesson and to give you an answer. So I'm also suggesting here cold calling. And what I mean by that is like no hands up, but just calling on somebody, one of those quieter persons. You could have a rota going of people that you ask in the classroom. One thing I would suggest, though, with our questioning and giving your learners the opportunities for discussion, is giving your learners wait time, especially if you're teaching in their second language, because you have to give them time to process the question that you've asked, then time to think of the answer, and then time to actually explain what they want or what they understand. So you may be thinking of others, and please do put them in the chat box. I'm going to give you a demonstration of all of these techniques now in the next slide, and it is called, pose, pause, pounce, bounce. And it's a great way of questioning or using a questioning strategy interactively. So this is an easy technique to hear from a wider group of learners and to encourage them to listen and to build on each other's suggestions. So let me give you an example question. What is your favorite season of the year, and why? And you ask that question to one learner, and then you build on the answer. The answer could be, okay, summer is my favorite season because I can, I was going to say go outside, but a lot of people here that I think I've got with me today would be saying winter is my favorite season. So Fred has said summer is my favorite season because I can go outside. And then from that, I would be building on that and say, do you agree, Elena, that summer is your favorite season? And then we would be pouncing on the next person and bouncing along. So this is what I call is pose, pause, bounce, bounce, or pounce, bounce. So that is just one example we can use in our questioning. Okay, so if you're jotting down ideas, you can add that to your toolbox now. Now, for my second tool, I'm going to give you some ideas here for quick checks for understanding. Somebody has already mentioned the exit tickets. Write down on a piece of paper at the end of a lesson. You can give them just a small slip of paper. You have got one, you could give them that one interesting question, or you could say 3 things that you've learned from this lesson. And then you'd be gathering in the slips of paper at the end and just reading. It is a quick fix. I would suggest that you don't do it particularly every lesson. that you want to use a range of strategies right at the end of the lesson or even during the lesson for checking their understanding. We can have a quick thumbs up and thumbs down. Now, there is a problem with that. I would say that learners or children will look around and to see who's got their thumbs up, thumbs down when you've asked a question, because they are, it's group mentality or herd mentality, and you're likely to like, especially the lesser confident learner. So you could have an idea that could be you get the learners to close their eyes and you put your thumbs up. Another thing you could do is like have a graphic and then other people don't see it because it's up above their heads. Then we could give them a multiple choice kind of question, and then it's like they would have to flash up A, B, C, or D. And that is done very quick fire. Or you could just be using the mini whiteboards. Now, with I'm going to go on to perhaps exploring exit tickets, or in another way, or giving you another tool actually, and that is KWL, or know what I know, what I want to know, and what I learned. So this is a great check for understanding. And this particular example that you can see on the screen is an example from Global Perspectives from Collins, and it's in the student book, and it's about weather. And so they have to fill in the grid, perhaps right at the very beginning of the topic, what they know already, and then what they want to find out about saying this particular topic of the weather. It could be how climate is affecting our particular town. And then this is what I mean, perhaps at the end of the lesson or at the end of a unit, what you have learned. Okay, so here the worksheet could have gone like from each particular lesson on that particular topic. So that's a great example that we can use. And then in terms of the exit ticket, that would be a record in their books. So another check for understanding is that, or to remember actually, is that as a teacher, we are programmed to ask lots of questions. But have you considered getting your learners to ask the questions? So I've got an anecdote here of a colleague that I was working with, and she would say to her actual own children, tell me, what did you do at school today? And she had boys, boys, they say nothing. I played football. Okay. But if you turn it around and you could say, okay, what did you do at school today? Okay, tell me one good question you ask. So with our learners, we should try to get them to ask the learners to find out what they are wondering. So techniques is about making an immediate difference. There's no planning or preparation, and perhaps you might end up doing less marking. So what are the questions your learners ask? And think about this as well. Asking questions and finding out things is learning. Answering questions is knowing. And we want our learners to be in that line there, asking questions and finding out questions. So we would be not just asking our questions, like I've just established here, but also getting them to ask the questions. So we're now going to go on to our next tool, But perhaps you may want to add something to your toolbox here about how we ask the questions in the classroom and how we promote discussion and how do we check their understanding. After we have been along this journey, as we're going along this journey, we do need to also make checks in other ways. And that is linking up with how we give feedback to our learners. Now, I've taken this quote here from an educational paper that is published in the UK. And I just thought it was particularly appropriate for today's webinar. Teachers know that the most effective feedback happens in the moment, at that point of learning. And that's going to be 1,000 tiny interactions and perhaps redirections when you're in the classroom and you're looking at the evidence there in their work. So feedback is a continuous process in lessons, and it is as much to inform me here from the quote from Ed, as it is to teach the child. What have they understood? Okay, why haven't they got this? How can I reframe that question? And that is something that I find particularly pertinent in the moment about reframing, recasting, just asking something in a different way. Along with our feedback practices, we should consider that it is going to be timely, as we said, in the moment, and it should be very specific to what your learners are doing, and it could or it should be actionable, okay, something that the learners can act on. Now, these practices have been put into practice by the Education Endowment Foundation, which is a research organisation in the UK, and you can look at some of their strategies that they suggest. I have taken them as well from their research, and also it's not just research, but they have put it into practice in a number of schools, definitely in the UK, and they are looking at international schools as well. It's for us, it's important to give feedback when things are correct, not just when they are incorrect. High quality feedback may focus on the task, subject, and then again, it's bringing in these metacognitive self-regulation examples. So let's think of how we give feedback, because this is something that I think that as teachers we have to, or we need to practice. I can give you an example here from one of the course books from Collins, and in the teacher guide they have got ideas that you could use in the lesson plan. So verbal feedback is a daily tool in my classroom. I try to say, I try not to say good job, but rather guide their learner. Okay, your idea is really interesting, but try to support it with an example, or you use the correct relative pronoun here. That's much better than last week. I also encourage learners or students to give feedback to their peers when they're doing pair work. Sometimes we're pretty much stuck on what we say or write. And so look at that example here. So you've used good vocabulary. Next time, focus on checking punctuation. Great idea in paragraph 3. Now try adding one more example to your support your point. So these are ideas that are in the teacher guide, and it's not just for when you're marking work. Okay, so thinking about your toolbox, what can you add to it now in terms of feedback? And then we're going to move on to another tool that we can use. And that is with peer and self-assessment. And I mentioned just then about giving feedback to our peers in either group work or pair work. But we could also think about reflection prompts in terms of self-assessment. So we have got here an example from primary science for self-reflection with rubrics. And here because it's from primary, we've got the smiley face emojis. And then underneath, I've got editor's checklist, and that is used in pair work, and it comes from Treasure House Treasure House English, which is a product that is used to teach first language English. But this actual example, the editor's checklist, would be used when they are reviewing a story in pairs or in groups that they have written as an idea that comes from the composition book. Another quick fix is that you could train your learners when they are looking at each other's work is to use 2 stars. What I liked, that's 2 stars. What I really liked about what you've written there, and a wish, like I wish you used full stops. And they're using this feedback technique along with the success criteria, what they were meant to be focusing on in that lesson. You may use a quick fix strategy, which is what went well. So it's like the 2 stars, and then even better if, and that is like the wish strategy. So those are little fixes that you can add for using peer and self-assessment. Next, okay, just a little moment to think about what you can add to your toolbox there in terms of peer feedback and self-assessment, because if you think again about that learning journey that you're taking them on, you want to have these stations here when we are using prompts or rubrics for self-assessment. Okay, so using technology. Now, this is our last tool that we could be using to help our journeys along the way. We could be using easy to use digital tools. So I'm going to explain a bit more about adaptive practice in a moment, and that comes specifically from Collins. Okay, I'm going to just mention here Kahoot, Quiz, Socrative, which are online quizzes that you can use. Then you could also use Google Forms if you are in, if your learners have iPads as exit tickets. So they're really easy to use, and you will get a very quick measure of perhaps the understanding of perhaps that could be a learning intention, or it could be a learning objective. Now, with using the tools, we could be gathering data. It could be the technological tools, or it could be our observational data, but we are going to collect it and then we can analyze it, and then we can adjust our cycle of teaching. Also, with having information, we can respond to misconceptions that are happening in the classroom. And then we can also differentiate our teaching methods to different learners. So it's very much okay. I'd like to mention this, okay, about how we use data. But what is that data and how can you adapt from this? And this is where we are, like, as that chameleon teacher. I'm also asked here about how do I analyze results quickly? Okay, so I suggest that you look for patterns and it's not perfection. So think about, if most students have understood, then you're going to move forward with the learning outcome. If many have struggled, then you're going to reteach. If a few have struggled, then you can provide small group or targeted support. And that is what we mean here by differentiated teaching. So I'm going to just highlight adaptive practice now. And this is where we can be using a digital tool to help our learners along the way. So it is giving the learner personalized learning, which is going to be tailored to them. It's also using the students' metacognition to reflect on their own learning and to think about what they're thinking. And I'll give you some examples that from the digital platform from Collins in a moment. Then it will help enhance recall of, like, that recall of that knowledge that is somewhere in their brain, and it builds resilience because they may have made a mistake, but they are just building up that growth mindset and gaining confidence that making mistakes, it doesn't matter. So for you, adaptive practice means that if you've got this data, you can intervene very quickly. It gives you some one-to-one teaching time, or it could be continuous learning for other learners. It does engage or it does increase student engagement because they are doing something online. And the end result is that outcomes will improve. So now I've got some examples here from I think it's both primary and lower secondary, and it's going to be maths and science. And you can see the kind of questions that may be asked from Collins Adapt. So they are going to be perhaps multiple choice, or they could be fill in the gaps. And what happens is that these questions are going to be individually tailored for that particular learner. So if they get one question right, it will move on to, say, the next learning objective. And with their answers, we've got meaningful insights here. But what it is here is that students are progressing at their own pace, but they have got progress checks along the way, along with either automated recommendations, or there are opportunities for the teacher to make personalized recommendation by using this platform. So if you see on the next slide, I've got an example of reporting, and here this can be done at student level. And so it's through the assignment, and it tells us really how long they've spent on a particular topic. I've got percentages here. Just a word, though, about percentages, because just as I've said, we're not talking here about grades. So the percentage here indicates a student has mastered the topic or not. Okay, so that was tool number 5. What can you add to your toolbox now? Perhaps you might want to just quickly go through in your head quickly to jot down something. Because now I'm coming on to reflection. And as you can see here, with that great learning journey that you've been taken on, say with your learners, you finally got to that point when you can take a breather here at a beautiful lake, in a forest with the sun setting. But think, what's one new idea that you could try next week? And it's always important to build into the lesson some time for reflection, because I can guarantee that as soon as they leave the room, they'll forget, unless you ask perhaps one of those interesting questions at the end. Okay, so during this webinar, we have looked at the purpose of formative assessment, why we're doing it, why does it matter? We've given or we've suggested a toolkit of effective strategies that you can use when you're taking your journey, your learners along that journey. And we have got some approaches that you can use in your everyday practice. Now it's the time for questions.
The first one I had was, how do you choose the right assessment strategy for a lesson? I think you slightly covered this, but it'll be good to go into detail a bit more if that's okay.
Yes. Okay. So choosing the right assessment strategy for your lesson, I'd say test some of the strategies that I have mentioned just now, but you really want to match the type of assessment strategy to your purpose. So it's actually like getting the right tool out of your toolbox. So if we're checking recall of a particular learning intention, we could do a quick poll, okay? Or if we want to be observing how our learners are thinking, you could use whiteboards or just actually do invite open responses. And then I guess if we're checking application of knowledge about how they're applying that understanding is, well, it's a short task or a scenario. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. There is one question in
Thank
the
you.
box about, is one class a week enough for formative assessment? I'm sure you'll kind of go into more detail, but it's an ongoing process throughout all lessons in the week. Or...
One, yes. I mean, but you're saying one class, I'm wondering if they mean like they only have one lesson a week to teach a particular subject, like I'm going to say global perspectives, or I think that's what they mean. And
yes, it's just said one lesson a week to teach. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and yes, because you're going to still be able to apply formative assessment strategies in every lesson. And in fact, it lends itself perhaps really clearly, because you could be at the beginning of the lesson is like establishing what they already learned in the previous lesson. And then at the end of the lesson, you're doing that quick poll check of their understanding. Yeah. So it's not necessarily formative assessment. It's not about subject content, really, but it's more about how they are retaining that subject content or knowledge, or giving them tools to retain it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have one about what formative assessments can you use for writing skills in particular?
Well, if you think about this could be another webinar in itself, actually. Because if you think about the writing process, in itself, okay, and about how we are setting them, we are going to be checking their understanding of what they're going to be writing at the beginning, like the topic, like if you, don't know, they've been given a topic to write about, we need to know, do they have a particular understanding so they've got enough to say? You can be using first of all, it'd be peer assessment in terms of like the drafting work. And then self-assessment at the end using certain rubrics. And then even during the process of the writing itself, I think there's a lot to cover there in just that one, the time that we've got here for that question. But I think you're giving us scope there for something else that we could explore with Collins. But if you have a look, if you have a look perhaps at the teacher guides, and then if you go into the lessons, in each particular lesson, it will give you ideas for formative assessment, perhaps with the questions you're asking, or with the rubrics as well for the checklists.
Great. And if you want to get more information on the teacher's guide, you can just email the email at the top, collins.international@harpercollins.co.uk, and we'll get one of the regional reps to give you some more information on that.